Before the sun rises, the city moves. Not everyone, just enough to make the streets feel like they're breathing. Somewhere near the bakery quarter, a cartwheel cracks over loose stones. A boy with a wine jug trips but doesn't spill it. Two gamblers argue over the name of a man who died yesterday. Nobody speaks the word Colosseum, but they all mean the same place. Some call it the arena. Some just say the sand. Everyone knows where they're going. By the time the gates open, there's already a line. Torches burn low along the arches, their smoke curling into the stone. The air smells like oil, sweat, and stale bread. A few early vendors set up near the walls, offering cold olives in wooden bowls or sour wine with more water than taste. Up above, the birds already wait. Ravens mostly. They know the routine. The seats stretch wide and high, but every inch of them means something. The emperor's platform is shaded with purple cloth, soft and quiet. Nobody else is allowed there. Right beside him, the senators sit on polished benches with fresh cushions and servants to wipe their faces. Behind them, the merchants and equestrians take their places, louder and less graceful, but close enough to be noticed. Then the rows begin to climb. Workers, freedmen, old soldiers, housewives, strangers, all packed into the middle tiers, shoulder to shoulder. Farther up, in the hot and distant ring where the sun strikes hardest, the poor take what they can find. They lean forward with hands shading their eyes, already sweating before the first gate opens. But even here, with cracked sandals and empty stomachs, they cheer the same as everyone else. Below the seats, the machines of the day grind into motion. In the tunnels, torch boys run with buckets and cloth. Slaves check pulleys, refill oil, and count animals by sound. Chains rattle. A bear coughs. Somewhere deep under the floor, a lion growls lull and long. The air down there is thick and sharp, like meat that's been left too long in the sun. A row of men waits against the far wall, chained at the ankles. Some stare at the floor. Some murmur prayers. One keeps smiling, though nobody's sure why. When the first horn sounds, it rolls like thunder through every arch. People stop chewing, stop talking. The noise climbs all the way into the streets, where latecomers break into a jog. Inside the arena, the crowd answers, not in words, the kind that shakes the railings and startles the birds into flight. A wooden gate rises. A prisoner walks out, blinking, bare feet dragging in the sand. He carries a stick. That's all. Another gate lifts on the far side. The lion steps into view. Its ribs show. Its eyes don't blink. For a second, nobody moves. Then everything happens at once. When it's over, workers with rakes smooth the sand and pour a fresh layer on top. The stain is still there. They just bury it deep enough to make the next one look like the first. That's how the morning starts. The crowd eats dates and bread. Children ask questions their parents don't answer. A senator points at the spot where the man fell and says something about justice. A woman tears her cloak to wipe her son's nose. The drums keep playing. Later, they send in the animals again. Not just lions this time. Leopards, bulls, wolves, if they have them, each one angrier than the last, confused by noise and lighting. The men who fight them aren't always trained. Some are just unlucky. They die trying to climb wooden trees or swing at air. The crowd claps. Not for skill, for surprise. A man getting gored in front of a painted backdrop still makes a better story than anything happening in the Senate. Then the real draw begins. Gladiators. These are not poor men. Not all of them. Some fight for coin, some for fame. Some because they were promised freedom and don't yet know it's a lie. And Murmillo steps out first, helmet with a fish crest. He raises one hand and the crowd answers. Across from him comes the net fighter. Bare chest, trident in hand, net rolled at his waist. He doesn't wave. They circle, each man waiting for the other to blink. The fight is slow at first, then over before anyone's ready. Then Murmillo knocks him down and stands above him, one sword pressed just enough to draw a drop. The crowd leans forward. Thumbs rise. Not everyone agrees. Some call for mercy, some for death. But one thumb matters more than the rest. The emperor gives his answer. Today, the net fighter lives. That's enough to send the crowd into a frenzy. They throw fig skins, shout praise, slap shoulders. The sand is still red. The sun hasn't peaked, but the arena already feels full, not just with people, with meaning. For a few short hours, no one talks about taxes or grain shortages. No one thinks about broken roofs or bad marriages. They watch, and the empire continues, one drop of blood at a time. If this midnight journey grips you, tap subscribe and hit like so you never miss the next part of the story. The emperor had the best seat, right in the middle, under the only patch of shade that didn't move with the sun. Senators sat near him, their stone benches lined with soft cushions so they wouldn't bruise their powerful backsides. The equites, Rome's upper middle class, sat just behind them. Merchants, retired generals, men who had made money from war or wine or taxes, each one shouting louder than the next, trying to sound more Roman than their neighbors. But once you climbed above that ring, everything changed. The cushions disappeared, the stone got hotter, and the shade vanished completely. Ordinary people sat on the rough benches, packed tight, shoulder to shoulder, chewing olives and bread, fanning their children with broken tiles, hoping the breeze would reach them just once before the next fight. At the very top, far from the emperor's gaze, sat the poor, foreigners, freed slaves, beggars, who managed to scrape together a coin. Their view of the arena was no better than a pigeon's, but still they came. Because even from the nosebleeds, you could feel the roar of the crowd in your chest. And if you shouted loud enough, maybe the gods would hear you too. The arena wasn't built for comfort. It was built to remind you where you stood. Every tier was a message. Power at the bottom, suffering in the middle, silence at the top. If you were lucky, you brought a cushion. If you weren't, you used your cloak, or nothing at all. The sun didn't care. It scorched every head above the second ring. And the heat only got worse as the day went on. Sweat poured off everyone, rich and poor, but the rich could at least wipe their foreheads with linen cloth. The rest made do with their sleeves. And yet, nobody left. Not when the next match was about to start. Not when the drums began again. Because the real heat wasn't from the sun. It came from the sand below. Vendors moved up and down the steps between fights, yelling louder than the crowd. They sold wine so watered it might as well be soup. They sold dried figs, fried mice, goat cheese wrapped in old leaves. A few slipped dice into customers' hands for bets. Some sold little wooden statues of gladiators with painted shields and big fake smiles. Children begged their parents for one. A man with no legs rolled past on a board with wheels, selling roasted chickpeas by the handful. You could smell the dust, the vinegar, the blood. It wasn't a marketplace. It was a moving stomach with eyes. People talked, even as the fights went on. They argued about taxes, about grain prices, about whether the emperor would marry again, or if his latest favorite would use her head. Sometimes the gossip mattered more than the man bleeding in the sand. But when something dramatic happened, when a net caught a man's foot just right, or a lion broke free of its handler, everyone froze. For that one moment, no one chewed, no one spoke, no one looked away. The arena had a way of pulling your neck like a leash. You didn't always know why you were staring, but you couldn't stop. That was the magic, or the sickness. Rome wasn't sure which. People didn't just come for the fights. They came for the chance to feel something real in public, to scream without shame, to cry and pretend it was from the heat, to point at someone else's pain and say, "That's not me. I'm up here, They came to feel powerful, even if only for the length of a sword fight. Even if they couldn't afford sandals without holes or wine that tasted like grapes. For one afternoon, they could vote with their voice. They could stand and shout, "Kill him," or "Spare him," and know that their words reached the ears of emperors. They could pretend that Rome listened, and maybe, just maybe, Rome did. No one talked about how many died. Numbers were for bookkeepers. The crowd remembered the good deaths, the funny ones, the surprising ones. The man who slipped on his own blood and dropped his sword. The woman, yes, sometimes women, who beat a man twice her size with a broken spear handle. The guy who ran in the wrong direction and climbed a fake tree until someone dragged him down by his foot. They didn't cheer for fairness. They cheered for theater, for the story they'd tell over dinner, for the joke they'd repeat at the bathhouse. The arena made death into entertainment, and Rome, being Rome, turned it into tradition. At the end of the day, when the shadows grew long and the sand cooled just enough to stop smoking, the crowd filed out slowly, sunburned and hoarse. They stepped over spilled wine, broken cups, dropped food, and bits of cloth torn from someone's tunic. Some argued over debts, some laughed too loud, some walked home in silence, still hearing the last cry in their heads. And some stayed in their seats a little longer, staring at the empty floor, wondering what it would feel like to stand down there, alone, waiting for the gate to open. By midday, the sun owns everything. It sits high above the arena, like a second emperor, beating down on stone, skin, and sand. The cheap seats burn, the sweat stings. Even the flies look tired. But no one leaves. Not yet. This is when the crowd gets what they really came for. Not duels between trained men, not polite applause over clever moves. What comes now is chaos. Wild things with teeth, stunts without rules, blood that sprays instead of dripping. They call it the Venatio, a name that makes it sound like sport. Like maybe it's about skill or fairness, but it's not. It's a show. A staged hunt inside a fake forest made of painted trees and imported shrubs. Workers rush to build it before the crowd gets bored. They toss sand in piles, drag in fake rocks, scatter bits of old animal hide to make it smell more real. They do it fast, sweating through their tunics. They know time is thin. They know the beasts are hungry. And the beasts, they come from everywhere. North Africa, the Middle East, strange islands with names nobody can spell. Lions, leopards, rhinos, ostriches, wolves, even crocodiles. If it breathes and looks dangerous, Rome wants it in the pit. They're rolled in on wooden carts, pulled by slaves who try not to look them in the eye. Some of the animals are half-starved. Some are drugged to slow them down. Some are just angry. All of them are confused. None of them know what they're here for. The gate opens, the light hits, the noise explodes, and they panic. That panic is part of the show. The hunters come next. Some are professionals, men trained to deal with wild animals using nets, spears, and courage they haven't lost yet. Others are amateurs, condemned criminals or prisoners of war, promised freedom if they last long enough. They're handed whatever's available: a short sword, a long stick. One man was once sent out with a sling and a rock the size of an egg. He died before the rock left his hand. The crowd loved it. It isn't always fair. Sometimes the animals win. A rhino charges and tosses a man into the wall like a rag. A bear breaks loose and mauls two handlers before it's speared down by archers hidden behind the scenery. The crowd cheers both ways. They cheer the kills and the escapes. They cheer when someone climbs a fake tree to hide. They cheer when the tree breaks. There's no good or evil here. Big, joyful noise. And sometimes, the animals surprise everyone. There's a story of a lion that refused to attack. It just sat in the middle of the sand and stared at the crowd until someone threw a rock at it. Then it jumped into the stands. That day, the crowd remembered what real fear tasted like. They still talk about it years later, like it was a holiday. There are moments of absurdity too. An elephant once wandered around the arena for half an hour without doing anything except picking up bits of armor and tossing them like toys. The crowd laughed until they cried. In another match, an ostrich escaped the gate and sprinted the entire perimeter of the arena twice before anyone caught it. People bet on it mid-run. Rome will gamble on anything if you let it. The organizers know what they're doing. They mix terror with comedy, violence with surprise. 1 hour, you watch a man get eaten alive. The next, you see a goat wearing a painted mask chase a flute player across the sand. It's not random, it's strategy. The crowd must never get bored. That's the real death. And through all of it, behind the walls and under the seats, the system runs like a machine. Dead animals are dragged away by teams with ropes and hooks. Blood is soaked up with sawdust. Workers scrub and sweep. New props are dragged in. New beasts loaded into place. The schedule is tight. The crowd doesn't see the mess, just the next act. That's how Rome keeps its magic. By the end of the Menaccio, the air feels different. It's not just hot anymore. It's thick, thick with the smell of blood and meat and burned oil. People breathe through cloth, but they stay, because they know what's next. The real fights are coming. Gladiators, heroes, legends in waiting. The Venatio softens the stomach. It sets the stage, but it's the duels that Rome will remember. Still, for a while longer, beasts fill the stage. The screams echo. The crowd drinks, and far above, the emperor watches it all with a face carved from still stone. Not smiling, just listening. By late afternoon, the arena starts to shimmer. Heat rises in visible waves from the sand, and even the marble benches feel like ovens. But no one moves. The crowd has waited for this part all day. The animals were a warm-up. The executions were noise. But now, the real show begins. This is the reason people came in before sunrise and sat through flies, smoke, and blood. The gladiators, they enter with a rhythm, 2 at a time. Not sprinting, not crawling, just walking. Confident, steady, trained. The way a man walks when he knows the eyes of an empire are on him. Each pair circles once for the crowd, weapons drawn, armor shining where it isn't dented. Then they split off, heading to opposite ends of the arena to wait their turn. It's not just a fight, it's theater. Rome loves a performance. Some of the fighters are veterans. They've survived half a dozen matches and wear their scars like medals. Others are fresh new recruits, slaves, or criminals trained in the schools outside the city. Some chose this life. Others were forced into it. But once inside the arena, that difference disappears. The crowd doesn't care how you got there. They care how well you fight, how long you last, and how bloody your ending is. Every style has a name. The Murmillo is heavy broad shield, short sword, helmet with a fish crest. The Retiarius is fast. No helmet, a net, a trident, and nerves like steel. There's the Secutor, the Thraex, the Hoplomachus. Each one designed to clash perfectly with another. The fights are balanced on purpose, like a brutal kind of chess. Slow versus quick, heavy armor versus mobility. Strategy is as important as strength. The crowd knows the styles. They shout advice from the stands like backseat generals. Go for the legs. Use the net. Circle left. Some of them even bet their last coin on the outcome. Others just want to see blood. Either way, the sand turns red. A good fight doesn't end quickly. It builds. Feints, clashes, retreat, advance. The weapons hit with a sound that cuts through the noise. A metal ring, a wet thud, a dry snap. When a blow lands clean, the crowd surges forward like a wave, drawn by the smell of pain. They cheer for balance, for surprise, for beauty in violence. And they boo when a fighter plays it safe for too long. There is no room for hesitation, no glory in survival without spectacle. When a man falls, the arena holds its breath. If he stands again, the cheers are twice as loud. If he doesn't, the ritual begins. The victor plants his foot beside the body and raises his weapon. He looks up, not at the sky, not at the gods, but at the emperor. Only one man decides whether the loser lives. The crowd chants. Some call for mercy, others scream for death. The emperor listens. Maybe he weighs the fight's quality. Maybe he doesn't. His hand rises, flat or turned, and fate follows. Mercy is rare, but not impossible. A fighter who showed bravery might be spared, taken away for bandages and months of rest before the next match. But those carried off aren't always lucky. Legs get infected. Gladiators who survive often do so in pieces. Winners are paraded like champions. They walk the ring with arms raised, faces bloodied but proud. They're handed wreaths, coins, sometimes even a wooden sword, the symbol of freedom. But real freedom is slippery. Even retired fighters are expected to stay close, appear at festivals, train new recruits. Rome doesn't let go easily. Back in the barracks, the mood is different. The cheers are gone. The sweat turns cold. Some fighters cry in silence. Others drink until they forget who they are. The sand that felt like glory an hour ago now sticks to every cut. A few clean their blades in water mixed with wine. Others sit staring at their hands, still shaking from the kill. Outside, the crowd files out, loud and sunburned. They talk about the fights, pick favorites, reenact moves in the street. Children swing sticks like swords. Old men argue about whether the emperor showed weakness. Food vendors push through the exits, selling what's left. Wineskins are emptied. Laughter returns. For the spectators, the day is done. They go home full of food, of noise, of something they can't name but hope to feel again tomorrow. Inside the arena, the floor is cleared one last time. The workers rake new sand over the patches. Blood disappears under dust. The animals are gone. The fighters are gone. The crowd is gone. But the arena stays. Outside the arena walls, life goes on. Bakers reopen their shops. Mothers gather water. Merchants haggle in the shade of broken columns. But something has changed. The crowd is quieter now, slower. Not because they're tired, but because the arena has done its job. The blood, the cheers, the noise, it worked. The people feel full. Not in the belly, but somewhere deeper. Rome has fed them something stronger than bread. It has given them the illusion of power. This is how the empire keeps order. Not just with soldiers or taxes or laws, but with performance. It turns violence into ritual, fear into theater. It gives the poor a front row seat to death so they forget their own struggles for a few hours. The crowd screams, the emperor nods, and everyone walks away believing they were part of something larger. Something Roman. That phrase, bread and circuses, sounds like a joke now, but it wasn't meant to be funny. It was policy. The government handed out loaves and staged free games not out of kindness, but strategy. A full stomach is less likely to rebel. A distracted mind asks fewer questions. If a man spends his day cheering a lion tearing to a thief, he doesn't spend it complaining about rent or grain prices. He doesn't plot uprisings. He goes home sunburned and satisfied, convinced that the system still cares about him because at least he got a show. But the spectacle didn't stop at the Colosseum. There were theaters, chariot races, naval battles staged in flooded amphitheaters. Even public executions were designed for impact, not critique. Elaborate deaths set to music with roles assigned like plays. A man dressed as Icarus was once launched by a catapult, his wings catching briefly before he dropped into the sand and broke his legs. The crowd laughed. They remembered the myth, not the man. Rome understood something we still wrestle with today. The human heart doesn't just crave justice, it craves story. And if the state provides enough story, loud, dramatic, emotional, it doesn't have to explain the rest. It doesn't have to fix the roads or clean the aqueducts or balance the treasury. Just keep the stories coming and the people will stay quiet a little longer. The games also trained the people, not in combat, but in emotion, in how to respond. They learned when to cheer, when to boo, when to beg for mercy, and when to demand death. Over time, those reactions became muscle memory. The crowd learned to love power, especially when it crushed someone else. And once that habit formed, it didn't just stay in the arena. It followed them into the streets, into politics, into daily life. Gladiators became celebrities. Their names painted on walls, their faces carved into cheap statues. Children played with wooden swords and copied their stances. Men tried to walk like them, broad, slow, proud. Some women left offerings at shrines for their favorite fighters. Others sent letters soaked in perfume, begging to be taken as lovers or even slaves. It didn't matter that most gladiators lived hard and died young. What mattered was the image, the story of strength, survival, fame. Even the emperor gained power through the games, not just by funding them, but by being seen, by sitting in the box above the crowd and deciding fates with a flick of the hand. That gesture, thumb up, thumb down, it became a symbol, not of mercy or cruelty, but of control. One man's opinion becoming law in front of 50,000 witnesses. That's not just entertainment, she told. That's a message. And still, the games weren't forever. Over time, the cruelty began to wear thin. Philosophers questioned the bloodshed. Some Christians refused to watch. Even the crowds started to shift. What once thrilled began to tire. New emperors tried to keep the fire alive, bringing in bigger beasts, stranger weapons, louder music. But eventually, even the greatest arena in the world couldn't compete with changing times. The Colosseum still stands, cracked and empty, open to the sky. Its arches whisper with wind and pigeons. Tourists walk its halls, snapping photos. But if you listen carefully in the silence, you might hear something else. Not screams or horns, but the breath of a system that once ruled through story. A place that knew how to turn hunger into cheering, fear into obedience, death into applause. Rome didn't fall in a day. But part of it still echoes here. If you step away from the arena and follow the dusty stone roads long enough, you'll find another Rome. One without lions or emperors. A city of smells, noise, and sweat. This Rome isn't carved in marble or written in history books. It's worn into the soles of sandals, shouted from second-story windows, and passed from hand to hand in the form of bruised fruit, warm bread, and stolen coin. The streets are narrow. Too narrow. Designed for fiti, not carts. The stones under your toes are slick from years of grime and spilt oil. You dodge puddles without asking what's in them. Here and there, an open drain runs beside the walkway, carrying everything the city doesn't want to deal with. Children squat on stoops, chewing olives or tossing pebbles into the gutter. Old men argue loudly about politics. They cannot change. It's loud, always loud. Barkers shout prices, lovers shout apologies, pickpockets shout innocence. And above it all, Rome breathes like a tired animal, never quite asleep. Shops spill into the streets, more fabric than walls. Butchers hang goat legs from wooden hooks while flies draw maps on the meat. Bakers wave burnt loaves to cool them faster. A pot seller yells at a boy who broke something and pretends he didn't. And tucked between the stalls are taverns, dark, smoky, loud. The kind of places where stories begin, lies grow wings, and knives settle debts. In these neighborhoods, nothing is truly private. A birth, a death, a fight. They all become community events. You learn not to ask too many questions, but somehow everything finds its way back to you anyway. Rome runs on rumor. It spreads like perfume, like fire, like a secret that tastes too good not to share. And whether you're a senator's son or a fishmonger's daughter, your reputation matters. One bad night, one whispered mistake, and suddenly people cross the street to avoid your eyes. Most people live in insulated apartment blocks stacked like brittle crates. The rich live on the ground floor, where the water reaches and the fire escapes matter. The poor live above, in wooden rooms that sway when the wind kicks up. Fires happen often and quickly, but you stay because there's nowhere else to go. Bathhouses are the great equalizer. For a few coins, anyone can shed their tunic, scrub off the day's dirt, and slip into warm water. The rich recline and discuss politics. The poor trade gossip and stretch out sore backs. Steam fogs over status. In the bath, even a slave can feel like a citizen for an hour or two. And when you emerge, your skin red and soft, the city feels just a little more manageable. There's no silence in Rome, but there is music. Flutes, lyres, the occasional drum. Some of it is beautiful, floating over rooftops at night like a promise. Some of it is chaos, played by drunks or desperate performers hoping for a tossed coin. If you follow the right tune, you might find yourself at a festival, bright colors, cheap wine, dancers who forget their shame, and priests who pretend not to notice. Rome loves a celebration, especially when it forgets why it started. But beneath all of this, there is another layer, a darker one. Rome is full of hands, hands that serve, clean, cook, and vanish. Slaves make up almost a third of the population. Some are teachers, scribes, even accountants. Others break rocks, pull carts, or warm the beds of people who never asked their name. Some are born into it. Others are conquered into it. A few can buy freedom. Their stories don't make it into marble or history scrolls. But without them, the whole empire would crack. Even free citizens live close to fear. A single bad debt can ruin a family. A wrong word overheard can mean exile. A grain shortage can spark a riot. The forum fills with complaints. The temples fill with prayers. And every night, people sleep with hopes smaller than dreams, just to wake up, keep their job, and not be noticed by the wrong person. Yet there's pride here too. Pride in surviving, in feeding your family, in keeping your sandals from falling apart. Pride in knowing the name of the best fish vendor, or which alley has the cool shade at noon. Rome isn't kind, but it rewards cleverness. And if you learn how to live between the lines, to speak carefully and walk fast, to listen more than you talk, you might not only survive, you might find a way to thrive. If you walk through a Roman home, past the threshold carved with protective signs, through the atrium that smells of ash and oil, you'll lie and notice a tiny shrine. It's not grand, just a little alcove with two figures, sometimes painted, sometimes carved from clay. They're called the lares, the household gods. And to most Romans, they matter more than Jupiter himself. This is where Roman religion begins, not in temples, but in kitchens. Every home has its spirits. The lares guard the family. The penates guard the food. There's a god for the doorway, a god for the hearth, a god for the grain in your cupboard. You wake up, you light incense, you whisper thanks or beg protection, and then you get on with your day. It's not about faith, it's about habit, about doing the right ritual so life stays balanced. If you forget or do it wrong, maybe your bread won't rise. Maybe your cow will die. Maybe your child will cough and not stop. So you remember, outside the home, religion takes on another shape. Temples rise like mountains from marble. Some are quiet, echoing halls where priests chant and pigeons roost in the rafters. Others are noisy festival grounds where sacrifices smoke and coins clink in brass bowls. Each god has their own followers, their own holidays. Mars has warriors. Venus has lunners. Mercury has merchants who wink when they pray. The gods are not gentle. They are useful, powerful, and deeply human in their moods. You don't love them, you respect them. And above all, you don't ignore them. Public rituals are everywhere. Before battles, before trials, before harvest. A priest cuts a bull's throat, and the crowd watches the steam rise from its open body. An augur spreads the organs out and reads them like a map. If the liver is smooth, it's a good day. If it's blotchy or torn, things will go badly. Doesn't matter how smart your generals are. If the guts say no, you wait. Omens are part of life. Birds flying the wrong way, bad luck. A dog howling at dusk. Someone nearby will die. You find a shoe upside down in your doorway. Better leave town. People read signs in smoke, in dreams, in spilled wine. A sneeze during a speech could derail a whole Senate vote. Most people laugh about it in daylight. But when night falls and the oil lamps flicker, they check the locks twice. Just in case. Curses are everywhere too. Little lead tablets buried under floors or nailed to walls. You scratch a name onto one, maybe a cheating lover, a dishonest baker, a rival at the market, and write your wish in crooked Latin. Let his feet stumble. Let his crops fail. Let rats chew his bed. You fold it, whisper to the gods of the underworld, and hope. Sometimes it's revenge. Sometimes it's fear. But mostly, it's a way to feel in control when nothing else makes sense. Even emperors fear the gods. Augustus claimed he saw omens before big victories. Nero blamed his cruelty on bad stars. When things go wrong, the people blame the temples. Maybe the gods are angry. A missed ritual. Broken promise. A temple debt unpaid. Better build a new statue. Better host a bigger festival. And still, belief isn't clean. It mixes with politics, with theater, with survival. Temples double as banks. Priests double as spies. You pray because everyone's watching, or because your neighbor did, and you don't want to be the only one left out. Religion keeps people obedient, but also afraid. Afraid of doing it wrong, of being the reason the rain doesn't come, or the plague spreads, or the emperor dies. But in quiet moments, belief feels different. A mother lights a candle and presses her fingers to her child's forehead. A sailor tosses wine into the sea before boarding. A widow whispers to the smoke curling from the funeral pyre. There's no crowd, no priest, no spectacle. Just hope, raw and ancient. Not for wealth or glory, but for protection, for peace, for one more day without disaster. Rome is a city of rules, but its soul is full of ghosts and prayers. Whether you believe or not doesn't matter. The gods are there, in every corner, on every threshold, waiting. When the first emperor rose to power, Rome did not yet know what it meant to bow to a single man. Kings had been hated. Power was meant to be shared, debated, balanced. But Augustus, calm, clever Augustus, rewrote the story. He kept the Senate, kept the rituals, kept the illusion of tradition. But beneath the marble, he held all the strings. And the people let him, because the wars were over, because the streets were calm, because he promised peace and delivered spectacle. That was the beginning. After Augustus came others. Some tried to be like him. Some didn't even try. One by one, they wore the laurel crown, sat beneath the purple canopy, and watched the city bow. But the job was too big, too strange, too poisoned with expectation. These men weren't just rulers. They were gods, at least in name. Temples were built to honor them while they still breathed. Statues of their faces, larger than life, stared down from arches and gates. Coins bore their names. Festivals marked their birthdays. Their decisions became law. Their whispers became prophecy. And for many of them, that power burned straight through the brain. Caligula started well enough, young, handsome, cheered by the masses. But not for long. They say he began talking to the moon. They say he made his horse a priest. They say he laughed during executions and once emptied the treasury to build a floating palace where guests drowned if they disagreed with him. Some of it may be rumor, but even rumor tells the truth. The man who could not be questioned stopped making sense. Nero fancied himself an artist. While the empire strained, he strummed his lyre. When Rome burned, he watched from a tower composing verses. He blamed the Christians, crucified them in gardens, and lit them on fire to serve as lanterns. He killed his own mother, his pregnant wife, and eventually himself, only when the legions turned against him and there were no more mirrors to admire. Domitian demanded to be called Master and God. He walked marble halls lined with mirrors to catch assassins. He had the walls of his chambers painted black and slept little, plagued by dreams of betrayal. In the end, it wasn't the gods or omens that undid him. It was his own court slaves, secretaries, even his wife, who turned and stabbed him in silence. Then there was Commodus, who dressed like Hercules and charged into the arena to fight gladiators, carefully chosen ones who were sick or half-blind. He declared himself the new founder of Rome, renamed the months after himself, and demanded to be worshipped in temples. His reign ended with a poisoned meal and a strangled bath. The gods of old, it seemed, had a short fuse for false divinity. And still, the empire did not break. It swallowed each madman and moved on. Because Rome didn't depend on one man. It depended on the machine. The legions, the governors, the grained fleets, the crowd's hunger for order and distraction. The emperor could go mad. He could burn libraries, waste fortunes, drown rivals. As long as the bread arrived and the games continued, the city tolerated it. But not without cost. Each mad reign chipped at the marble. Each purge, each fire, each cult of personality left cracks in the myth. Senators became cowards. Generals turned into plotters. The common people learned to flatter, to lie, to pretend. Trust decayed. Fear became the unspoken anthem of the capital. A slip of the tongue could cost your family everything. A single joke could mean exile. Loyalty was demanded, but never returned. Even the palace became a prison. Emperors surrounded themselves with guards, food tasters, astrologers. They feared their shadows. They made laws by impulse and reversed them by dinner. Some never left their villas. Others traveled the empire trying to find peace and instead brought chaos. To rule Rome was to wear a crown made of glass, shiny, sharp, and always one crack from shattering. The people knew. They watched. They learned how to read a ruler's mood by the color of his robe, the sound of his voice. They celebrated loudly and feared quietly. And when a madman finally fell, they cleaned the blood, replaced the statues, changed the name of a month or two, and started over. Because that was Rome. Gods in the sky, monsters on the throne, and 50 million people caught in between. Not every Roman had a name that history would keep. Most didn't. In fact, most weren't even free. For every senator who toasted to Jupiter, for every general who marched with laurels in his hair, there were dozens of silent hands in the background, cleaning, cooking, carrying, bleeding. Rome was not built by Romans alone. It was built by the conquered. Plagues were not rare. They were normal, the foundation on which everything stood. Some were born into chains. Others were taken in war. Gauls, Greeks, Egyptians, Jews, whole families sold in bulk. A child in Numidia could grow up speaking Latin just to serve wine in a villa he'd never own. A teacher in Athens could be dragged across the sea to tutor spoiled boys who never learned gratitude. Beauty, talent, strength, it all had value, but none of it meant freedom. You could find slaves in every corner of Roman life. In the kitchens, covered in flour and sweat. In the bathhouses, scrubbing strangers' backs. In the markets, holding the sunshade over a lady's hair while she bargained for oranges. Some drove carts. Others mined silver until their lungs turned black. A few wrote poems and balanced ledgers. A rare few earned manumission, the right to buy their freedom after years of obedience. But most never did. Most died in silence, remembered only by scars and cheap urns. And then there were the punishments. If a master died mysteriously, every slave in the house, guilty or not, could be executed. No questions asked. Crucifixion wasn't reserved for the worst. It was the standard. A message carved in flesh and nailed above roads so others wouldn't forget their place. You didn't need a trial. You only needed someone richer than you to say it happened. But even among the free, Rome had its shadows. The city's beauty hid cracks, alleys where debt collectors waited, courtyards where stolen goods were passed in silence, corners where hired blades whispered prices. Crime was everywhere, some of it petty, a purse cut from a belt, but some of it ruled the underworld, smuggling rings, extortion networks, flesh markets. Rome's laws were harsh but uneven. A senator's son caught drunk and violent might be scolded. A baker's apprentice caught begging could lose a hand. The prisons weren't what you imagine. Most Romans didn't rot behind bars. They were whipped, branded, enslaved, or killed. The Mamertine prison, Rome's most infamous, was a dungeon beneath the city where air barely moved. It was a pit for enemies of the state, rebels, traitors. You weren't sent there to wait. You were sent there to disappear, and still life carried on. Street gangs formed, youths with nothing to lose, loyal more to each other than to any god or law. They controlled blocks, demanded protection fees, settled scores with blades. Officials looked away if bribes were paid. Sometimes even senators hired them for dirty work. After all, it was easier to silence a rival with thugs than with politics. Prostitution, too, flourished in the shadows. It was legal, taxed, regulated, but still brutal. Many were slaves, some barely old enough to speak their price. They were branded to prevent escape, hidden in brothels that reeked of oil and skin, and yet the same men who condemned them in public lined up quietly in back alleys, clutching their togas and excuses. And what of the gladiators? The ones who survived the sand and roar. Some became legends. Mollusks became bodies. Those who lived too long were either worshipped or feared. They trained in schools like soldiers, but with worse food and harsher masters. They fought not for glory, but for a shot at surviving the next match. And when they died, few asked their names. Still, hope flickered in strange places. Some slaves earned their freedom and became businessmen. Some ex-gladiators married and opened taverns. Some criminals escaped, fled to the hills, and became something like folk heroes. The empire didn't love them, but it needed them, because every marble pillar was cleaned by a calloused hand. Every meal served to the emperor had passed through a slave's fingers. Every victory parade marched past people who would never taste power, but who made sure the streets were swept and the crowds fed. Rome was proud, but it was built on backs. If the gods looked down, they saw two Romes, the one carved in stone and the one that bled in its shadow. And if they wept, it was not for the emperors. It was for the forgotten. It didn't happen in a single day. Empires don't collapse like towers hit by lightning. They rot like fruit, sweet and shining one season, soft and sour the next. Rome was the eternal city, or so they believed, and for a long time it felt true. Roads stretched like veins across 3 continents. Legions marched in rhythms older than memory. Markets bustled. Baths steamed. Senators still lied in marble halls. But beneath it all, something shifted. The cracks came from every direction. Some were inside corruption, greed, men more interested in wealth than wisdom. The army grew too large, too expensive. Officers sold commands. Governors stole from their provinces. The coin lost value. Bread grew thinner. Walls rose higher. The empire became harder to feed, harder to protect, harder to understand. Some cracks came from outside. Germanic tribes, once just rumors in the forest, became armies with names. Visigoths, Vandals, Huns. They tested the borders. Then they crossed them. Not always with swords. Sometimes with trade. Sometimes as refugees. But Rome, arrogant and slow, saw them all as the same, lesser, temporary, manageable. Until they weren't. In 410, it happened. Alaric, king of the Visigoths, stood at the gates. And Rome, the mighty, the unshaken, was sacked. For 3 days, the city of 1,000 gods was looted. Doors were kicked in. Temples burned. Gold statues melted. Virgins screamed. Old men wept into their rings. No army came to save them. The legions were stretched too thin. The treasury lay empty. The spell was broken. People who once believed Rome was blessed now asked if the gods had turned away. But still, the empire limped on. Pieces broke off like crumbling cliffs. Britain was lost. Then Spain. Then parts of Africa. Emperors came and went. Dozens in a single century, some reigning only weeks. Assassinations became as common as speeches. The Senate still met, but their words had no weight. They ruled shadows. By 476, the Western Roman Empire died quietly. A barbarian chieftain named Odoacer deposed the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus. A boy with a grand name and no real power. No one raised an army to avenge him. No one carved his space into a coin. Rome was finished, and the world barely noticed. But that's not the full truth. Rome didn't vanish. Its laws lived on. Its roads were used. Its language, Latin, twisted and spread into Spanish, French, Italian. Its ideas infected kings and popes and scholars for centuries. Even its ruins taught lessons. Marble stolen from temples became cathedrals. Broken aqueducts fed medieval towns. Statues lost arms, but not meaning. In the East, the story was different. The Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines, survived for 1,000 more years. They called themselves Romans. They dressed in purple. They prayed in churches built over old shrines. But it wasn't the same. The heart had stopped. The West had fallen, and nothing would beat quite like it again. So, what brought the end? Historians will argue, was it greed? Barbarian pressure? Or simply time? Maybe it was all of these. Maybe none. Maybe every empire carries its own seeds of death, buried under triumphs, watered by pride. Rome expanded until it couldn't breathe. Its brilliance demanded darkness to shine. Its gods promised order, but chaos always waited. And what remains? Walk among the ruins. Touch the broken columns. Sit on the fallen steps. Feel the weight of what once was. The Colosseum still stands, scarred but proud. The Pantheon's dome still holds the sky. Tourists snap photos. Pigeons roost where emperors once sat. Street musicians play flutes where senators debated. The stones remember. But more than the stones, the stories remain. Of mothers lighting candles for the lares. Of slaves whispering songs in kitchens. Of soldiers gritting teeth in frozen forts. Of poets watching the city fade behind them. Of emperors who wanted to be gods and gods who vanished in smoke. Rome is not just a place. It's a question. How much power can a people hold before they forget what they are? It's a warning that no city, no matter how mighty, escapes time. And it's a whisper that glory fades, but echoes. If told right, can last forever. So if this long night walk through ancient dust has moved something in you, if the flicker of torchlight on marble still lingers in your mind, don't let the story end here. Subscribe and come back soon, because history doesn't sleep.